It did freeze. Hey y'all, welcome. I don't know if it is frozen or not. It looks like it is.
I can hear you pretty good.
Yeah. Everybody's moving from me.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
How's everybody doing?
Pretty good.
Can't complain.
Good.
So we're here to talk about, all this craziness with the elections. Why don't we start with everyone saying where they're from, or are we all from Oklahoma except for Tyler?
I'm in North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina.
Right.
So we got I'm Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Pittsburgh.
I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Okay. So we got Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina represented tonight. Yeah. So I mean, just to start everything off, what's something crazy or interesting that you're looking into when it comes to this coverage on election day?
I think, well, for me, honestly, I would say I hear a lot about this one being like one for democracy, and it's easy to see why people have made that kind of one-to-one linkage to the erosion of norms that we've considered to be kind of American for so long, and what's happening now since 2016 to now. But I think it's more of an election for just like sanity and just common sense. So I think we've a lot of the coverage that I've seen hasn't necessarily reflected that, but I think it's one of the things that we at the Black Wall Street Times have done a really good job, in my opinion, at covering to make sure that we remind people that lies and misinformation is at an all-time high, and it's important to know where you get your news from, and where it's disseminated from, and how it affects your community. So in my opinion, I think this election season is going to be a lot more about, justifying and validating those sources of information, and hopefully voters will choose to do that.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you, Ezekiel. Yeah, I mean, I'm just hopeful for these political ads to end. I'm hopeful for a sense of peace to wash over everyone, and that we can kind of start seeing each other as human again. So I'm looking forward to positive outcomes within the election. But yeah, every election cycle, every political cycle, I think I'm just asking myself, what is this? What are we doing here? And I'm hoping for outcomes that are going to really help and grow everyone, as opposed to the vitriol that we've kind of been feeling for the last couple of years. So yeah, I'm really hopeful to no more commercials and to seeing what avenues of harmony exist. Yeah.
So I guess kind of two things that I'm interested in seeing. One is just how does the polling play out, in the last two cycles, for I guess the main cycles like 2016 and 2020. I think that the polling community would admit that they were like a little bit off, especially in 2016 to an extent. And I think that, I mean, even with like Nate Silver, on like 538, they're projecting that like the Republicans have like a slight advantage right now. But I think he's even saying on like Twitter that he doesn't necessarily fully believe the advantage that's being given to them in the polls that are coming back. So like, have the pollsters been able to figure out how to accurately balance out the polls, despite people not like necessarily picking up their phones now to like answer like the random calls to be in these polls? And then kind of secondarily, what does the landscape look like for Republicans like post this election? So like last night, Trump was doing a speech in Florida to try to like hype people up there, but he was also like giving Ron DeSantis some like dumb nickname, right, and like kind of trashing him. So it'll be interesting if Republicans underperform. Will Trump just like come out of the gates on Wednesday, just like throwing everybody under the bus, yelling about how they all need him? And what does that look like? Is he going to try to bring them together? Is he going to try to divide them? Are they going to have their own little civil war inside of their own little party over the next like 2 years? I'm really interested to see where they go from here.
Are there any particular races that folks are looking at? I know here in Oklahoma, this governor's race it's kind of gotten a lot of the attention. First time in, I don't know, maybe Nate can tell us how many years it's been since someone in Oklahoma has been competitive as a Democrat in a gubernatorial race. But
not since 2006 has that happened. So it's just been about. Thanks, guys. Sorry. No, it's been about a solid 16, almost 20 years since you had a Democrat in office in Oklahoma, and I think, so that was whoever was right before Mary Fallon, Brad or something. Yeah, it's been a long time. So this is wild and surprising, especially the way that Oklahoma's been going since then.
Well, and Tyler, you were talking about polls, and I feel like we've all probably been looking over these polls every day, just kind of going over them. But there's so many races that are close, and so I'm wondering if these polls are off, is that going to be something that helps Democrats more, or vice versa? Because I know in Oklahoma, I'm wondering when it comes to the Supreme Court decision, for instance, like, are we going to see a swell in turnout that isn't being covered by these polls? So I think that's interesting to look forward to.
Yeah, I feel like I saw something yesterday that some pollsters were saying that like older women, whereas like immediately post Roe and maybe like a couple months past that, women were turning more Democrat, obviously, but that like some of the older women now are turning more Republican, and they've kind of like swayed back. So interested to see how that pans out. Also, like you bring up the point of like how if the polls are skewed, how do they play out? And I guess that's like an even more interesting point, because in the past 2 election cycles, the polls weren't necessarily correct, but they were like not correct in a manner that it was advantageous for Republicans. And I feel like people are saying now like, oh, I don't think Republicans are winning by this much. Like, I think the Democrats are closer. So can they get it wrong the other way? I feel like is a whole nother like interesting part of this. And if they do get it wrong the other way and it's like Democrats have the advantage, is all polling just like kind of broken? How do you fix that?
Yeah, I wonder, what are y'all? So Tyler, you're out like over here in Pennsylvania. Like, what's the vibe there? I don't know if y'all already talked about it between like Oz and Fetterman, and how's it looking on the ground?
Yes, I haven't ventured out much into areas outside of Pittsburgh, just with like school and work and whatnot. Pittsburgh, definitely very solidly going to vote for Fetterman. One thing that's been really interesting to me is that the governor's race seems decently safe for the Democrat here. 538 has him polling at like 9 to 11% up above the other guy, but then they're showing like the Senate race is like a dead heat, even. It definitely seems like the debate that occurred, where Fetterman was struggling to speak fluently, that seems to like really throw a wrench into things for people, whether or not like that's legitimate. The guy's like recovering from a stroke, so it seems like he can show up and vote. It seems like he still understands what's going on. It seems like we should try to be compassionate to people who have like health issues from things they're recovering from. But regardless, it seems like that's definitely like created a much tighter scenario, and I'm not sure how that's going to play out for him.
The Oprah Winfrey endorsement. Well, I guess the media has basically called it an endorsement. I know we basically called it an endorsement. I wonder, how that's going to play out. If that's going to be enough to kind of put him over the edge. She can get a book on the bestseller list. Can she get a candidate to the U.S. Senate.
In some ways, people would say, and I think this might be Oprah going back and correcting a past mistake. Because there are people who believe, hey, you are the one who put Fetterman or Dr. Oz on. You are the one who kind of gave him his start as America's doctor. And this may be Oprah in a way going back and making good on, I'm not going to call it a mistake, but maybe a mistake that was had or created in the past. And so I think in some ways, Oprah's powerful in of herself. But this might have been Oprah coming back and saying, hey, I'm just going to go ahead and make good on this thing from the past.
Interesting.
But I think any endorsement from Oprah should likely is going to help you. So that's pretty exciting to see there. But I know there's races across the nation that are like that we're looking at, that have at one point they were leaning strongly in the direction that seemed favorable, but now they're closer, or maybe they're further apart than you thought they were going to be. So many races like that. It's just been an interesting election cycle in general.
One kind of random thing that I saw today that seemed maybe unique to Pennsylvania politics, I think it was one other place, but I saw some stuff that folks from Australia and I think the UK had booked trips to Philadelphia and one other place for election day. So they're election excursions to see how much of a disaster the US is. And so I guess they were kind of making canvassing more difficult, because I guess they were just out watching people trying to talk to other folks. So I don't know what that'll look like tomorrow, but that just seems like another just weird part of all of this.
That's what we need, more fences.
Right. People are paying it's $4,500 US to come here and watch what a mess we are as a country right now.
They might be the products of that's bad information they're receiving if you think it's worth it. I think the elections could definitely be better, and it's kind of been a debacle what's happening in terms of voter suppression. However, $4,500 for a ticket to see a day.
Yeah, it's going to be crazy though around the country. Even I think Arizona in particular has a lot of people that are outside of the polls now, or outside of watching over people as they come and go. So there's a lot of voter intimidation attached to this as well. So depending on where they go, unfortunately they might see something. So prayers up to all the election workers this week, because they're definitely going to be going through it.
Yeah. I think what's been really interesting to me is watching candidates. I know somebody said they're watching from Maryland, so candidates like Dan Cox, who's running for governor of Maryland, or candidates like Lee Zeldin, who's running for governor of New York, or even Carrie Lake in Arizona to a little bit of an extent, who had these wild, just absurd lies about the election that they were saying over and over and over again. Even saying we should jail people for, Carrie Lake was saying we should jail all the people who certified the last election. And they're now successfully in some way able to start walking that back. And voters are kind of easily forgetting those things. It feels like, not everybody, but it's just interesting to watch how quickly people are forgetting what people did.
You're right. It's an inflection point on just where we are as a country in terms of what we allow from our elected officials. Can elected officials say a verifiably false truth and still have my vote? That question is very different amongst many people in this country these days. And I think when I hear people say, I care most about democracy, those are the type of issues they're talking about, but I'm never really sure. But in general, I just know that there is this sense that we really do need to have a referendum or a decision made as to, hey, this group of folks may not be who you would normally vote for, but they at least tell the truth. They at least tell the truth, or they're not outright giving you disinformation or lying. Yeah,
it's like the bar has been set at a very low level, since 2016. When even people like Liz Cheney, who, she did something that few other Republicans are willing to do, which will stand up to Trump, and yet she will be considered pretty conservative as far as her policy viewpoints. But nowadays, at least I know in some cases, like in Oklahoma, people are willing to cross along party lines if they feel like it's for the greater good. Which when it comes to like the Oklahoma governor's race, it's on the flip side. We have a lot of Republicans crossing over to Democrats to vote for Joy, and that's another thing I'm curious to see how much of an impact that'll have. So it's gonna be a wild night.
Yeah. And not just there, but I know you were asking earlier about places across the nation too. Even though I'm in North Carolina, and Sherry Beasley and Ted Budd are going against each other, I can't help but be almost fascinated by the what's going on in Georgia. Like there literally could not be two different black men in the entire world than those two. Like literally from one to the other, and to see the representation that the Republicans have chosen for their side, as opposed to what Democrats would consider to be a quality candidate, has been eye-opening, but also I can't say surprising, but it kind of gives you an insight into what people would consider to be a perfect candidate for their side and what that looks like with our skin.
We're lowering our standards in a way for the elected officials that can represent us. And in part, I think it's if we don't take care of the good people who are running, good people won't run. But to that point, I mean, it's almost become this ideological thing of, hey, this person here is going to say non-truths and potentially stand for harmful things or done harmful things, but we're still going to vote for them. It's Raphael Warnock and Walker are a quintessential example of this.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Nate. Well, no, I was just going to not miss the opportunity to talk about the 2 men of Georgia and say that we're 5 men here, and just kind of acknowledge that, and we kind of get some more voices in here, and then to just say Oklahoma is on my mind, just because I'm more focused on what's happening locally to understand the national, but it's the same story here as well. One of somebody who's willing to say things that are politically expedient and one who's not. I think it's just kind of like, where is it going to lie? Where are we going to land as a country?
Yeah, I mean, so what are y'all? I mean, everybody here is at least in some way plugged into what's happening here in Oklahoma. So, I mean, from everything y'all are seeing. Yeah, first I felt bad for. What is it feeling like, y'all? If you have to make a guess as to what's going to happen tomorrow. If you already said that while I was like frozen.
Yeah, we already talked about this, Nate. What are you?
Yeah, why are you back to your old ground?
I'm gonna go.
Yeah, we're done here.
Okay. Do y'all feel like Democrats have gotten? Do you feel like the Democrats are doing a good job at messaging? Because I'm confused in a way of like you have all these people who we've just that are just like not good candidates and are just saying things that are not categorically untrue, and things are not like ostensibly that bad under Democratic leadership. There are things that need to get better, but it's not that bad. So how are Democrats, like, what do they need to do differently, do y'all think, to actually not be in this position where they might lose to some of these fringe candidates?
I think they need to match their same energy. And I don't mean as far as rhetoric and as far as, abrasiveness, and because Republicans have their own way of messaging, which is, usually out of bounds and, mostly racist. So I'm not saying they should adopt that. But what I am saying is it would behoove them to be a bit more aggressive in terms of like a candidate such as like Gary Chambers Jr., somebody like that who isn't afraid to make political ads that are very targeted at a certain individual he's trying to cultivate votes. He's trying to cultivate people that are also his ads always feel present, like he just made it 5 minutes ago, to me, at least in my opinion. They always feel like they're in the moment, like he just stepped away and just did an ad real quick and now he's back to work. And I feel like a lot of Democratic ads are very, very tapered, very, very, very neck tied up, I would say. Very, very professional, very not personal, not engaging necessarily. They use a lot of the same generic language. So I would say a lot more personality, and a lot more not being afraid of just standing on your platform and not knowing that you may lose a vote or two because of it, but standing on what you believe firmly in.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, I feel like the Republicans, like you said, although it's a lot more abrasive and in many cases racist, they have a way of sounding like they're speaking to the common man or common person, and Democrats, a lot of times, they kind of have an Ivy League way of talking, of getting their message across. And that doesn't always reach people, and sometimes it turns people off. But on another note, like kind of similar to that, when it comes to Gary Chambers, the DNC, I mean, I'm not seeing much support for candidates like him who are willing to keep it real in, it may be tough to win races, but still, I'm not really seeing organizations like the DNC supporting these candidates. And also the media. The New York Times recently wrote an article talking about the 11 Black candidates running for U.S. Senate across the United States, and Gary Chambers wasn't included. And so there's a gap, I think, in messaging, but then also there's a gap in coverage of some of these candidates too. These non-traditional candidates.
Yeah, I would agree. There's definitely a gap in coverage of non-traditional candidates. I would also kind of push back on the idea that Democratic messaging isn't good. I don't know that that's the case. I think Democrats are trying to pitch a wider tent and capture more people, and therefore their messaging has to be a little bit more broader. I also think that Democrats actually do believe in the power of government and using solutions to entice people to vote for them, whereas I don't know that Republicans always believe, and this is not Republican voters, but Republican elected officials typically believe in the power of government. Typically, it's like, hey, I don't believe in government. Send me to Washington with those people we hate, so I can break it. And it really shouldn't. It really shouldn't be that way. But I think in those regards, people respond better to. Sometimes negative energy is fun. Sometimes it's fun to kind of complain about the things we don't like. Republicans are very good at talking to you about the things that you may not like.
Yeah, that's funny. When you talked about like send me to Washington, I'm an outsider. All I could think of was Mark Wayne Mullen. He was like, I'm only going to run for 3 terms, and he's like run for 5 and is now running for Senate. And I'm like, oh my God.
He probably can't count. He just
it's a classic strategy. Send me to Washington, that place that we all hate, because I know how to deal with them.
Yeah.
You like Washington. That's why you're going.
I do think what's interesting here though is even though like James Langford is favored to win, unfortunately, and even though it seems like he's favored to win, if you look at the polls, and even though the same is true for Mark Wayne Mullen, what's interesting is both Kendra Horn and Madison Horn have done a really good job of like closing the gaps of like prior races, right? Like last election, 2020, Inhofe won the seat that Mark Wayne Mullins is going for by like 30-40%. And the same was true for James Langford in 2016. And now they're struggling to get double-digit wins. I don't know. It's really interesting to watch that happen.
Well, I feel like those are 2 cases of where Democrats are doing good messaging. They've Joy Hoffmeister too. They've done a good job of targeting a few specific issues that voters are worried about, and explaining how their opponent isn't getting that job done on those issues. And so I feel like, yeah, there are definitely cases where Democrats excel in coverage, and I think that's what we're seeing here is Democrats more willing to really get out there and fight and not just fill a position as a candidate, So,
a couple thoughts. So, Alvin, you were talking about the messaging, like maybe it's not that bad. And I was reading some stuff today or listening to some stuff, and they were talking about like normally in a year like this, where like inflation is crazy high, the economy is down, and the president has like his approval ratings in the gutter, like the ruling party would be about to be like just obliterated. in the midterms, but like somehow it's like kind of close. So people say, you know, like the messaging is bad, but maybe the messaging isn't like as bad as we think it is. I think the Gary Chambers thing is like really interesting because I think there's like a much deeper conversation to be had that I'm sure we could all like provide tons of insight on, is like the race dynamics of America and how like somebody like Trump can show up and just say a bunch of like kind of straightforward stuff in the beginning, and people are like, oh, I love this, he's just straight talking me. And then Gary Chambers can show up and basically straight talk in like his commercials, and he's just like, this is literally the way it is. And people just completely ignore him, or criticize him, or like don't provide him even like the time of day. But I mean, you know, that's America. But like, I think he provides like a really interesting avenue that the Democratic Party seems to like not ever want to like look into or check out. That seems like it's compelling to a good number of people in the States. Like someone actually just straight talking them instead of giving them the political mumbo jumbo, which is like every commercial that we see. Dang, I had one other thing. I'll think of it here in a second. Sorry. What do you all think that Joy will like shift how Democrats handle statewide races in Oklahoma? The last time that Alvin and Nate and I were on, we kind of had a conversation about what it would take. And I was kind of convinced that we should be looking for like statewide people that would run for statewide office that would be more willing to be like pro-life. Since then, like the Roe v. Wade was overturned and this became like a whole different world scenario. But like even in the debate, like Joy said, like I'm pro-life, but I think women should have the right to choose. She's clearly a more conservative candidate. Nate, you know, you pointed out that like maybe Kendra Horn or them are kind of closing the gap, but they're still getting like hammered. Do you think that we'll pivot to like finding more conservative folks, or do you think we'll keep on keeping on and just saying we're fighting the fight, but then like lose by like 30 points?
I mean, I think that what is helpful right now, right, is that like Joy is somebody who's known statewide. She's had success statewide. And she has been able to really not necessarily be very conservative. She's been pretty moderate, right? And she's been able to say, like, these are the key issues that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about education. I'm going to talk about corruption in the state government. And I'm going to talk about building up our economy to make sure it works for everybody. And she's been able to do that in an effective way. We'll see how effectively tomorrow, but she's been able to do that pretty well. And so I think it's, you know, I don't know that it's even this person is super progressive or super moderate. I think it's how are we going, when we talk about messaging, how are we going to message what these issues really are and why they matter to people? And I think, honestly, she's also helped by, you have a governor who's just incompetent and terrible, right? And so if she was running against somebody like Matt Pinnell, I think it would be harder. This would be less of a contest. But she is running against a really weak incumbent who is a terrible governor. And I think that in and of itself is obviously helping a significant amount. But she's running a phenomenal campaign. All statewide candidates, more or less, have run really great.
Everyone from the top to the bottom of the Democratic ticket. Yeah, and I would agree. We specifically talked about Kendra Madison Horn, not related, and Superintendent Hoffmeister, all impressively intelligent people who know how to work across lines of difference, which you have to in Oklahoma. And I think what I really appreciate about those campaigns is that other than Madison, we've seen it from Superintendent Hoffmeister and from Kendra Horn's former state representative, how well they are at reaching people who typically would not vote for them or with them. And I think it's that they're able to take a message that actually is good and be a messenger that people can trust. And I think being that messenger that people can trust has a lot more to do with it in Oklahoma than we actually give credit to.
One thing I'm also curious to see is which issues are really motivating voters the most to go out, you know, statewide and national. Is it education? You know, is it inflation in the economy? You know, I know between well, between all three of us, really, we've spoken with different economists who've kind of laid out that, hey, you know, this is an issue that we're dealing with, but the media, you know, at least the White House, from their perspective, the media kind of blows it out of proportion, and the Republicans kind of run away with it. But I'm interested to see how much of an impact that has on getting voters out and who they select.
Yeah.
What do y'all think about, what issues do you guys think, or you all think, is gonna be top of voters' minds tomorrow?
And forgive me for talking so much, y'all. You know, when I think about issues, I think about the typical things that make life easier or make life harder for everyday working people. What I found about politics is that most people don't care to pay attention to them because they don't really they don't really affect their day-to-day life. But when people start to feel as if it's harder to pay for the things that they could pay for before, or move as freely, or have as much agency over the things they want to, that's when politics becomes more of an issue and people start paying attention to them. I'm most interested to see what the Dobbs decision, the reversal of Roe v. Wade, will do. Because I think there's really an assault on the rights of women that people don't speak clearly about. And that for me is probably number one. Currently, I'm seeing what happens there. And then, of course, I think people have a hard time buying in an environment where rates are bad and like the cost to get a mortgage is really high. That hurts people, and the cost to get groceries is really high. That really hurts people. So I think it's a combination of things, but it comes down to what makes life easier for folks. But I don't think we talk about it in that way. Curious to hear what other people's top issues are.
Yeah, I don't know, man. If I'm being honest, I think it's somewhat of a not a myth, but I think people's minds have been made up a lot long before today or tomorrow. I think when you're inundated with so much political news, you know, Fox News or MSNBC or whatever your news station is or whatever you prefer, you know, you listen to them for years and years at this point, and that's the side that you've chosen. They tell you what you want to hear. It makes you feel good about yourself. It makes you feel good about the people around you. And I think in large part, besides, you know, undecided people that say they're undecided, I think a large part of America has seen, if January 6th, if ever since 2016, if the politicians and people in place haven't showed you who they are at this point, you know, you probably haven't been paying attention at all because it's been out here. So I think people's minds have been made up for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on where you kind of stand politically. Unfortunately, I think if you are more conservative, I think the driving issue for you, in terms of like why I'm not like what am I affected by, but why am I voting? It's the economy. I think that's probably the number one issue. I think if you are more on the progressive side, threats to democracy and, you know, like you said, Alvin, assaults on reproductive health are more of a driver. And so I think that kind of like plays into this division we see in general, right? Is that we're motivated to go to the polls even for different reasons. And so that makes it even trickier, I guess.
Nate, if I could not push back, but just even add to that, when I was just sitting back thinking, is it easier for me to drive to the polls because, actually that's hard. Is it easier for me to drive to the polls because I believe there's an assault on my right to vote or on my right as an autonomous individual in the case of women? Then is it if like I just can't afford groceries this month, which is pushing me or compelling me to vote more in y'all's mind? Because that's a question that I think about. Because Roe versus Wade was in June. It was coming before that, but we heard about it first in June. Does that carry more weight than the price of gas now?
So for me, I think that's like an interesting thing that I'm looking at. So my number one thing is like, how long are people's memories now? So the Supreme Court has started like a new term that they're hearing cases for, and like we're going to continue to have a conservative court for a while. Read some like theories over the summer that, you know, like they were really activist last summer, but the blowback from Roe v. Wade might make them be like less of an activist court going forward because they saw all of this like negative press. They had people at their houses, stuff like that. But if also it just seems like the way the world works now is something happens and then 2 days later you've forgotten about it. So like, is there going to be enough of like a backlash against this that the courts feel that people are still mad and people remembered? And if they don't feel that, and if Republicans do win by a lot, will they just kind of continue on being like an activist court? Yeah, I think that's like the biggest thing for me is just like, how do we as a society like respond to bad things that happen now? Is it just day to day?
Tyler, I think like that is probably like why I think you are seeing some people more driven by the economy than they are by these issues of like fundamental rights and freedoms. Because I mean, the Dobbs decision, if we had this election in the middle of July, no question, it would have been a clean sweep for Democrats. But you can't, every day when you drive to work, you're not seeing, you know, evidence of rights being taken away. What you are seeing is gas prices on gas station signs. And so that constant reminder is there for you about like the tangible, what am I paying? But it's not there necessarily because having rights stripped away is something that can be much more, for some folks, can be much more of an undercurrent, unfortunately. And so I think that's what makes it hard, is it's not as prevalent on a basis.
We might be also, and again, answering the question of messaging. That might be why messaging is so easy for some issues and harder for others. Imagine going into November and saying, remember in June, when you could just point to gas and say, it's that guy's fault. All the candidates running are Joe Biden. Remember, it's easier in the sense to campaign that way. Sorry, we weren't talking about messaging, but just now you made me think about it. This conversation has kind of gone in circles, and I appreciate that as well.
I think the message thing is like super important here, though, too.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, specifically in a race like the one in Georgia. You know, I was just looking at this new study that came out from Lending Tree showing like 40% of Black households struggled paying their utility bills this year, and so, you know, and even in the Stacey Abrams race, you know, or whether it's the Senate race with Warnock and Walker, or the governor's race with Stacey Abrams and Kemp, Black votes, especially Black male votes, are playing kind of the deciding factor, it seems like, with these polls. And so it'll be interesting to see if Republicans are able to persuade those voters to make them believe that they can solve those problems for them. Even though when Republicans are in control, our national debt is always sky high. But you know, who's looking at that? So
who's counting?
We should all be counting. We should all start calling it out when we see it. We should all be sounding the alarm when things don't add up. You have to balance your checkbook or you balance your bank account. We should be able to balance our politics. But
I have to jump off. But one thing I would love to come back and rewatch you guys talk about is if Joy wins tomorrow, like, do you think Kevin will like attempt to actually contest the vote and like say it's like not real and like make a big push? And like, what could that look like? But it was great talking with y'all. Ezekiel,
just leave that there at the end while you go off, right? Good talking to you, Tyler.
See you guys.
No, I don't. I don't think that's going to happen.
I don't either.
Yeah, because one thing I will give the one thing I will give Stitt credit for is the fact that he is like one of very few statewide elected Republicans in this country who haven't perpetuated that live election fraud. So I don't believe it.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, for doing the bare minimum there.
Ryan Walters, on the other hand, he might.
Who'd you say?
Ryan Walters.
Yeah, I could definitely see that happening. But I mean, I wouldn't be too worried in that race. You know, at the end of the day, Oklahoma's elections have always been pretty quick and seamless as far as counting the votes and things like that. So, any final thoughts, anyone?
The litmus test there would just be: is this a person who could gain from saying something politically expedient? Will they say that? Are they going to say that? And then yes, they would. So Kevin said probably not. Kevin said it's not a person who's going, like you said, Nate. It's not a person who's going to kind of toe the line on this is a fair election or not. But when I look at Ryan Walters, definitely a guy or definitely a candidate, I should say. I'm not going to suck in. A candidate that would say something that was politically expedient, just to get where they're going. And I think that's a theme that we just have to watch out for as voters. Ezekiel Ray outlined, if you're voting for somebody, you're probably likely already know who you're voting for. But if you're undecided, if you're one of the unlikely undecideds out there, really be looking for folks who are just saying what they're saying, because it's convenient versus who is actually bringing a solution.
Yeah.
And I think it's a pretty stark difference between the two.
Yeah. I know we're in the time constraints, so I'll just say ditto. But yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Oh, Nate, did you have something else?
No, I would just say vote for the country that you want tomorrow.
Mm.
That you want tomorrow, right? Because that's quite literally what is on the line in a lot of places.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with y'all, and I hope you guys have a drink ready. Regardless of the outcome tomorrow, I know I will have something handy. So we'll see how tomorrow goes. All right.
Yes.
Good night.
All right.
Have fun voting. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Yep.